I think of you too. I'll say that. I think of you too. Oh, cool. There was no haste or worry of separation, but Derek's hand still found its way around yours. You thread your fingers together with his. This is cool. He doesn't have to say it, but I like how he shows it. He does. It would be nice if he said something like, I like you, but I get it. We're in middle school. You're not necessarily like, even someone as confident and brave as Derek is, I think it's kind of sweet that he's a little shy about this. Well, that's what I find really hot, is when confident guys have their shy moments and humble moments. So sexy. The soft touch squeezed at your heart even more than your hand. Getting the chance to spend some time with truly just the two of you was more than you could have hoped for. You owed Elizabeth one. She knew. Our sister knew. I'll give Elizabeth definitely points for that. Major brownie points for that. She deserves it, despite the fact that, I still like to give her a hard time. Despite taking an entire extra jaunt around the boardwalk, you still arrived at the entrance before your parents. However, there had been a shift in the group. Nicholas was awake. As soon as Derek noticed a small third figure standing by Elizabeth and George, he started like he was hit by a bolt. You felt him squeeze his fingers around your hand in a stunned state. He made a break for his siblings, bringing you along with him. The motion was not exactly subtle, and it caught the attention of the boy in question. He let out a shout when he saw your rapid approach. Well, technically it wasn't your arrival that had an impact. Nicholas sprinted away from the meeting spot, not willing to wait a single second for the reunion. He crashed into Derek, wrapping his arms around his brother's thighs and sticking his head in the space between Derek's legs. Oof! It was powerful enough to knock Derek off balance. He had to release your hand so he could swing his arms out to the side to stop his wobbling. That's fine. That's his brother. This is his little 6-year-old brother. That's fine. I'm not going to be jealous. Once he was sure he wasn't going to topple over, Derek bent down and scooped up his hanger-on. Seeing Derek carrying Nicholas felt extremely familiar by this point, considering that had been the case for the entire afternoon, but Derek wasn't sick of it yet. He could handle it for a little longer. Derek nudged his head towards the other two members of your party, encouraging you to come. Together, you and Derek walked the rest of the way to the boardwalk entrance, while Nicholas clung onto Derek the whole way. George waved you over.
Welcome back.
Welcome back. Hey, and the moment you were in whispering distance, you were greeted by a hushed message from your own big sibling. Good work. She knew what we were doing. She knew what we were up to. She knew about our ulterior motives, both of our ulterior motives. She put a finger to her cheek and smirked suggestively. It confused you for a second before you realized she had seen you holding hands even from a distance. Derek slowly kneeled to let Nicholas get down. The little boy stood on his own 2 feet, but his 2 hands didn't detach. They only grasped the hem of Derek's jersey instead. While brushing his brother's messy hair, Derek glanced up at Nico's temporary babysitters. He stared at them questioningly. What happened? Was the obvious unspoken question. He's only been up for a few minutes. And he was really grumpy at first because you weren't there, but we got him talking about the dream adventure he had when he was sleeping to keep him busy, and that worked. It was really funny, and Nico had a good time too. George, good thinking, George. You're a good middle brother, George. George beamed with pride at the success, and you noticed how much closer he stood to Elizabeth. Your sister accepted his company just as welcomingly. They were their own partners in crime for the day. I'm basically positive that after about 5 seconds, he stopped telling us his actual dreams and was making it all up. But it was cute. Derek blinked at the two as if he'd witnessed a miracle. It kind of was in a small way. He was able to pass the mantle of responsibility, and everything turned out fine. However, Elizabeth and George wouldn't be replacing Derek anytime soon, or likely ever. Nicholas may have behaved for a bit, but now that his biggest brother was here, the young lad wanted to be taken care of. His gaze dropped to the ground as he pulled at the end of Derek's shirt. Derek, my tummy hurts. I want an ice cream. No ice cream, Nico. That's not going to help your stomach. But you can have some of my snacks. I saved you part of it. Derek's tone really sold the idea. It was full of appeal from the fact that it was his snacks. He could hype up a product better than any of the employees running games on the boardwalk. That is, little kids like the idea of having snacks that are not necessarily their own. My kids are definitely a testament to that. Nicholas brightened immediately. He clasped his own collar and leaned his head all the way back to look up at his brother's face from where he stood against Derek's legs. He wasn't kept waiting long. Derek pulled the bag out of his pocket and shifted and sifted through the mix of walnuts and cereal to pick out the treat especially chosen for Nico. Once he'd collected a small handful, he passed it over to Nicholas, carefully dropping the round cereal puffs one by one. In Nicholas's tiny palm, the amount was almost overflowing. Nicholas gratefully received the offering. He shoved the whole thing into his face and ate directly out of his hand. It reminded you of feeding oats to a pony, except in this case, Nicholas was both the feeder and the fed. Derek nodded in satisfaction and rolled the bag over in his palm. George, these are for you. He gathered the last... look at George's smile. That's adorable. He gathered the last wayward pieces of cereal and then offered the well-worn bag of nothing but walnuts to the middle child. It's been a really long day and there's still the ride back. You should eat something. George didn't argue with that. He gladly accepted his brother's thoughtful gesture. Thanks. That is sibling goals. Older brother, oldest sibling goals, Derek is. George plucked out just one from the pack, the hardest looking nut in the bunch, and took a bite out of it. His gaze shifted towards Elizabeth, or Elizabeth as George knew her, as he swallowed his snack. Then he asked a question. Do you want any? Oh, George. He's going for it. You know what? I would. Thanks. Elizabeth was the third person who took a turn of opening a hand to receive a snack. George took a few of the nuts into her awaiting palm. Derek, you and Hart can have some too. Nicholas's fingers remained pushed against his mouth, but his distinct chomping stopped. He spoke muffled words filtered through a handful of half-crushed cereal. I can share too. This is so wholesome, and I love it. I love this. He stuck his sticky palm up towards Derek's face instead of his own. The gesture had crumbs cascading down his shirt. Nico couldn't reach high enough to get it all the way to his brother's mouth. Derek shook with giggles and poked Nicholas's wrist to nudge the pile of soggy cereal away. He had to take a second to breathe before he could explain himself. I got some of the cereal right here. That'll be from you. Thanks, Nicholas. I'm gonna eat it. That logic seemed sound to Nicholas, or maybe just seeing his brother smile made Nicholas smile too. Either way, he accepted that not taking more of the cereal counted as him sharing it. But he wasn't done. Nicholas turned around on a dime, arm still outstretched, and positioned his hand towards you. Amazingly, he wanted to share with someone other than Derek. You kiddos are all way too nice. You cooed at his sweetness. You smiled with a forced politeness. You had no idea how to react. You matched Derek and laughed. You cringed at how gross the snack was. You matched Derek and laughed. You knew he was trying to be nice, but it was just hilarious. Before Nicholas could start flinging bits of cereal at you in his eagerness to share, a warm voice boomed above the din of the busy boardwalk. Good evening, family and friends. It was Mr. Suarez, and not only him, you spotted all four of the parents weaving their way through the crowd. We're here. The sight of his mommy and daddy made Nicholas forget all about feeding you his pre-chewed snack. He smashed the remaining cereal into his mouth so he could use both his hands to wave at his parents. Dad! Mom! Derek called back with equal excitement. The parents picked up the pace and came to gather around their children. Greetings were shared between adults and kids. Immediately, Ma noted the face paint that was now adorning your group. You all look wonderful, so creative. Nicholas forced himself to swallow the mouthful. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. He sucked in a huge breath, pointed to his cheek, and cheered. Rainbow! Yeah, why, you're right, it is a rainbow. It's beautiful, Nico. Nicholas giggled gleefully at the praise from the grown-ups. Mrs. Suarez then clasped her hands together and changed the topic. Well, everyone, I'm sorry you beat us here. Hopefully you weren't waiting too long.
This is gonna be great.
Nah, it was fine.
I appreciate it.
I appreciate you waiting here for us. We went on a very lovely bike ride across the boardwalk. Really? You were out there pedaling around on bikes? Mm-hmm. Elizabeth's and George's faces of genuine surprise at the news helped to distract from the awkward, knowing glances that you shared with Derek. Returning them was a real hassle. That's why we got here late. Definitely worth it, though. It was. It was. And did you children have a good day? Nicholas threw his hands in the air to answer with full force. Yeah! Even though he missed like 80% of it, but it's okay. He still had a good time. Derek softly patted his littlest brother's head. His voice was much quieter and distinctively relieved. Yeah. You, George, and Elizabeth nodded and offered your own points of agreement. It might not have gone as you had imagined, but none of you would consider it a waste of time. It was an experience worth having.
Great.
That's great. I'm sure you made the most of what you had, but we better get going. It's very late. Perhaps we should pick dinner up on the way home. Absolutely. It's been hours since we left, and Nicholas can always sleep in the car since he won't be home before bedtime either way. All the kids except for Nicholas had their face go completely flat, and Elizabeth snorted. Mrs. Suarez didn't miss that instant reaction. She raised a brow. Derek straightened the bands on his wrists and broke the news to his mom. There was a glint of amusement in his eyes. Sorry, Mom. I don't think that's gonna happen. Nicholas remained oblivious to the discussion going on about him. He was leaping and bounding from board to board, completely refreshed. His mother frowned. It was obvious to her what had occurred. Mr. Suarez was unflustered. He shared some dignified optimism. Well then, he'll be up to keep us company. True, we'll all be together. Those words reached the small ears of the youngest person there. Nicholas held onto Derek's abdomen, liking the sound of that promise. His older brother looked down at him warmly. Glad to have you back, Nico. And George, you're such a reliable bro. He wrapped one arm around Nicholas and reached over to pull his other brother into the hug. George welcomed and reciprocated the embrace. Look at how cute this is. Look at this. Look at this. Look at these families. So wholesome. The Suarez trio snuggled together in a tight squeeze, and their flaking face paint rubbed off on each other. Your gaze wandered from the public displays of affection and went to your older sister. Elizabeth was definitely not a hugger, but you whispered your own siblingly appreciation for her. Thank you for being such a reliable sis. She gave a smug flip of her hair. You owe me one. That I do. I knew that was coming. Let's go. That was all that needed to be said. Your completed party took their final steps on the boardwalk, heading straight towards the parking lot. Mrs. Suarez was leading the pack. Hey, Mom. Hey, Mom. Mom. Hey, Mom. Nicholas shouted and waved to get his mother's attention from behind while still using one hand to grip Derek. Guess what? Lisbeth carried me. She did? That's so considerate. Lisbeth. Your moms were walking arm in arm, sharing hushed commentary with each other a distance from the group and tittering over what they'd heard. I carried you too when you were sleeping. She only did it for the last few minutes. It was nice of her to do that. You're so sweet, Lisbeth. You snickered along with your moms. It was nice of her. I'm gonna give her credit. It was nice of her to do that. Positive reinforcement. Elizabeth's in a very good trajectory right now. Positive reinforcement. It was nice of her to do that. It was. I feel that who carried Nicholas the most today should get the biggest say in what we have for dinner.
Exactly.
I'd second that. Sounds fair to me. Then we all agree. That would be Derek. I guess this means Derek will be our dinner decider for the night. Probably. Derek scratched at the rainbow on his cheek and chuckled airily. He shrugged without comment and simply continued to walk. His little brothers stayed at Derek's sides and they bumped along together. You strolled at Elizabeth while the parents surrounded the sets of siblings at the front and from behind. Derek's hands were full with Nicholas and George, but he snuck a fond glance over at you. None of his excitement had faded. The night was still young and bright, and you could count on every person there. Despite being miles away from Sunset Bird, you felt right at home. I loved that moment so much. That was such an enjoyable, wholesome moment. And it's, again, what I love about these moments is that they don't always have some sort of like conflict that you had to overcome or like unnecessary drama. Some of them did, but it was never, they never like overstayed their visit. And in here, I guess you could argue that there was, the biggest conflict was like, what are we going to do about sleeping Nicholas? But no, it was really like mostly just watching and experiencing these people experiencing a really fun time at the boardwalk. I really loved how this gave us a really great, it really gave us a good idea of the family dynamics amongst the Suarez family, and in particular the sibling dynamics between Derek and his two other brothers, which is very different from the sibling dynamics between my character and Elizabeth, and also, the difference in dynamics between my character and Derek are very different from the ones with my character and Cove. So I really appreciate it. I was very pleasantly surprised, actually, by how much I ended up really loving the Suarez brothers outside of Derek, too. Like, we didn't get as much screen time with George, but by the end I was like, yeah, George is cool. George is cool. They could have easily made the siblings a little bit more like unlikable, or make him less like make it less attached, make you less attached to them. And while I certainly am way more attached to Derek than I am to George and Nicholas, I still like their characters a lot, and I really love the relationship between the three of them. And of course, the biggest like MVP highlight of this was Derek, and more than just Derek, but like just showing how Derek is as an older brother, which is going to be interesting to me, since like another DLC like moment, siblings. You know, how much more like can we get? Like, I feel like we already got a lot of knowledge and information on the brother dynamics, and how all of the middle, older, and youngest child like interact with each other, and what the relationship is like, and how really selfless Derek is, and it's really cool. I like it a lot. We started off with I wanted to start off with a bang. That definitely was a bang. I'm hoping that the other 4 moments are just as strong, or at least close to it, because so far like Boardwalk was definitely like hands down of all of the moments that we had in any of the base game, other than not including the wedding DLC, of course. I think the Boardwalk was probably one of my favorite, if not my most favorite, of all of the moments. And part of that is because I am partial to Derek, and having like some really cool moments with Derek was amazing. And I love how they're starting to sow the seeds of the crush that we're forming, not only like with Derek, but it seems to be reciprocated, which always is a positive. It's always a big plus. So yeah, so far I am loving this DLC. So far it's already more than proven it's worth. Like every penny that I've spent on this is well worth it so far. And I'm just really excited to experience what else there is to this DLC. So hopefully you're enjoying it yourselves up to this point too. So let's see. I am very intrigued. Lemonade, I am very much interested in, as somebody who is a foodie, and I do like me some lemonade. I gotta say, I do like me some lemonade. But I kind of want to dive in more into the sibling dynamic, because I do like Nicholas and George. Geez, I forgot. It's been a tick since I last played, so I think it's George is the middle child. I'm about to find out again. So let's do siblings. I want to do siblings. You stretch your arms high as you stepped into the spot on your wooden floor where the last rays of sunshine landed. The remaining warmth of the day was still enough to tickle your skin. You felt pleasantly full from dinner, and the only thing that was left on your plate was waiting for a knock. Derek closed your door as he came in behind you. You'd gotten to spend the afternoon together, and you knew his mom would arrive to pick him up any minute. Thanks for having me over, Hark. Of course. I mean, after our romantic excursion at the Boardwalk, I'm hoping we did a lot of hanging out. You don't have to thank me for that. And why am I not surprised you tried to take dishwashing duty away from Elizabeth? Derek pressed his palms together, flipping each hand over and under in a loop. It could almost be viewed as a mock washing gesture, but he was probably being awkward. I just thought it'd be fair. I didn't help with the cooking. Derek is so thoughtful. You're so sweet. You're so funny. You're too much. You're welcome to come do my dishes, Derek. You shook your head in amusement. You sighed. I'll say you're so sweet. Aw, thanks. Oh, Derek, Mr. Manners. But before you could settle in enough to even take a seat, a pounding set of thuds cracked the laid-back mood. Derek scrunched his limbs totally inward from the shock. You'd been keeping an ear out for that exact sound, but it was completely unnecessary. Tourists halfway across the town wouldn't miss that blare. The racket was followed by the door Derek had so successfully closed moments ago, roughly swinging open. Obviously, the person on the other side wasn't Mrs. Suarez. It was your older sister. With a huff and eye roll, she delivered a brief message as fast as she could spit it out. Derek's mom is here, and our mom made me come get you about it. Okay, we're coming. Why did you knock if you weren't gonna give us a chance to answer? We got the message. Go do the dishes, Elizabeth. Thanks for telling us. What a great messenger, gal. You stared at her wordlessly. I'm gonna say... Why did you knock if you weren't gonna give us a chance to answer? She gave you the stink eye, but didn't waste a single extra word on you. That's right. Elizabeth's reverting back to old Elizabeth. That's okay. Her character growth is, it's coming back, but it's to be expected. In one motion, she curled her fingers over the edge of the door, twisted around, and yanked the door shut. The books and boxes on your desk's shelves shook. Derek's teeth clattered too. He whispered through the grimace. Man, I'm sorry for that. She's so rude. Want to trade Nicholas or George for her? I was right. It is George. I'll take both if you want. You groaned in frustration. Are your eardrums all right? You looked away in embarrassment of her family. She's so rude. Yeah. She gets extra grouchy sometimes. Right now, for example. Derek's shoulders eased into their resting position, but his expression was pinched. He began to whisper while glancing the way your sister went. His voice was hushed, secretive, almost afraid Elizabeth might slap the door open again and find out he was talking about her. Do you think it's about the dishes, or... I don't know. You could have only given a half-hearted answer. You struggled to understand why Elizabeth acted out the way she did a lot of the time. But your mom is waiting. We gotta go so you can get home. Right. Hark? Derek's mouth opened and closed without saying anything else. He lifted a hand to try gesturing, but dropped that without it going anywhere. It made you raise your eyebrow. Yeah? His bright green eyes squinted around into narrow slits, but you could still see the way they darted around. His gaze was trained on the ground, scanning across the floorboards, though everything that really mattered was probably inside his actual head.
Well...
I was wondering... He paused again. Derek's hands balled into tight fists. He let out a breath and finally asked a question. Are you busy tomorrow? Like, do you want us to go on a date, Derek? Are you asking me out? You blinked. That was all? No? The simple answer still made Derek flinch. It might not be all.
Really?
Really? Yeah, really. That's what I said. Then he spread his fingers and arms out into not quite a shrug. Would you want to come over to my house for the day? Heck. Score! The tone of voice and pose he took was casual in a scripted way. He definitely wanted you to feel like it was totally optional and no problem if you turned him down. You couldn't tell if that was the end or just another point in a process, but you were going along for the ride. I can probably do that. I'd have to ask my mom's. Derek leaned in closer, slowly opening his eyes wider. Some kind of suspense was growing. All right. He dipped his head in tiny, repetitive nods. Then the look on his face went distant again, the way it did when he was thinking deeply. Then finally he flung his hand up to complete the shrug and spoke the question he'd been stalling on. Would you want to come over tonight instead and sleep over? Heck yeah, sleepovers! I love sleepovers, especially with the boys I like. We could camp out in my living room. It'd be fun for our own little party. I was super excited because, especially in middle school, which is during this time, I did have crushes on guys, and it was a very, of course, very strange time for me since I was dealing with my sexuality, and I went to a private Catholic school, so I obviously wasn't out to anyone and didn't have any intention of coming out to anybody in that moment. I was still even struggling with accepting my sexuality at that time, but I definitely recognized that I was severely attached to a lot of the boys in my school, and I just remember when the one kid in my school who I had a huge crush on invited me to his place for a sleepover. Now, it wasn't just the two of us, it was more of it was sort of like a birthday, I think it was a birthday party of some sort, like a birthday sleepover or some sort of, he had multiple people over at his house. And even though it was not just us, intimately only, I remember feeling the butterflies, and was super excited about doing this sleepover. And I think it might have even been my very first sleepover ever, if I remember correctly. And so that was one of my favorite memories from back in the day. I mean, obviously nothing happened because he's straight. To this day, as far as I know, he's still completely straight. But he was still like a really good friend of mine, and I had on hindsight, like looking back on it, I clearly had a giant crush on him. And the really cool thing the biggest thing I remembered though from hanging out at his house was not so much me and him, but it was actually me getting to meet his mom, and I felt like I really felt very close to his mom, and I really like enjoyed getting to know her, and the unfortunate thing is she ended up, I think, passing away for health reasons. I'm not going to get into the reasons, but I think she passed away a few years later, several years later, and I still remember like just being able to. She was like, I guess, the first real adult outside of my family that I think I befriended in a very short amount of time. Like for some reason we definitely bonded and had a really interesting, like, very short-term connection that a full-grown adult would have had with a middle schooler that was friends with her son, who had a huge crush on her son, but of course she didn't know that. So anyway, that brought me back. It'd be fun, our own little party. Yeah, would you want to come over tonight instead of the sleepover? We could like camp out in my living room. It'd be fun, our own little party. Now the nervousness made sense to you. Now you were the one feeling nervous. You were completely stunned. Your confusion was compounded. You almost laughed. It absolutely tickled you. I almost laughed. I know that's pretty out of nowhere. If you can't make it or don't want to or anything, I'm totally cool with it. I want to. Hopefully my moms will let me. Let's do it. Yeah, but why? Yeah, but why? You nodded happily in agreement. Would your parents be able to manage that? I don't know. Maybe. I'll say let's do it. Awesome. Come on, we'll ask right now. Yeah, definitely. My mom is waiting for us. The two of you left your bedroom and bounded down the stairs one after the other. Your warm greeting came as you hit the landing point on the first floor. Hello, Derek and Hark. Your two moms and Derek's one mom were gathered in the entryway of the living room. Derek reached a hand out towards her and waved it. Hey, Mom. Hey, welcome to our house, even though you've been here for a few minutes already. After smiling at him and at you, Derek's mom turned her head over her shoulder to speak to your parents. Thank you again for taking care of him. Mom? Derek uncharacteristically broke polite decorum by interrupting his mom. It got her attention and she let him speak. I had something I wanted to ask you, and Mrs. and Mrs. Angel. Oh? What is it, sweetie? He had the attention and encouragement of all three mothers. On this stage, Derek didn't beat around the bush the way he did before.
Please.
I was wondering if Hart could come with us and spend the night at my house. Please. He knew your moms well enough to foresee potential concerned reactions, and so Derek sped through his extra terms to make sure they heard that part before answering. We'd set up in the living room instead of my room, and my parents and brothers would still be around. People could keep an eye on us. As expected, Mom and Ma weren't instantly thrilled. They were shocked by the possibility. And while he was successful in avoiding the first obvious pitfall, your mom still had a completely different apprehension to fret about.
Know.
That's pretty last minute. You're about to walk out the door. We couldn't have Hark impose. Derek's mom stayed strangely silent after he popped the question. She fixed a stare at her son, crossed her arms against her chest, and shook her head at him. But the shake didn't mean no. It had another meaning that maybe only a Suarez could get. Still, She smiled. We can find a place for Hark tonight. If there's no family conflict with that and he would like to come over, of course. Yeah, I mean, as parents, especially as Asian parents goes, we never want to burden anyone or impose on anyone. That's a big thing for many, like, Asian parents, I think, as Filipinos in general. So I understand that, of course. But I mean, as long as Suarez is cool with it, heck yeah, let's do it. Both of your moms turned their faces right towards one another on instinct. They were astounded that Derek's mom didn't mind. Huh. Mom scratched her head over it. Derek had made a huge request with no advance warning, and Mrs. Suarez had 3 children to care for already. It seemed unreasonable to her. I am a very, like, social, extroverted person, so if my kids want to have people over, spend the night, that's the thing, I love hosting people at my house. I don't care if it's my friends, if it's my kids' friends. You know, I want to, like, make them dinner, bake them cookies, bake them a cake or some pie. I mean, I would just be